They said Ruth Mercer would die behind the counter of her own store, with a ledger in one hand, and no wedding ring on the other. In Hallow Creek, that was the kind of sentence people repeated until it began to sound like truth. The town sat low between frost-burned prairie and black pine mountains, a row of wooden buildings leaning against the wind. There was a blacksmith, a church, a livery stable, and Ruth Mercer's dry goods store with its green-painted sign fading above the porch. Ruth opened that store every morning before the lamps went out in the houses. She swept the boardwalk. She trimmed the wicks. She stacked coffee tins with the labels facing forward and folded calico cloth so cleanly that even women who disliked her still bought from her. That neat shelves did not make a woman lovable. Ruth was 32. Plain in the way hard work makes a face plain. With dark hair she pinned too tightly and hands roughened by rope, crates, cold water, and flour sacks. She spoke when something needed saying. She smiled only when she meant it. In a town that liked women soft, grateful, and easy to read, Ruth had become a problem they could explain with one cruel phrase. No man wants a woman made of iron. Years earlier men had tried. A rancher's son had brought her peaches in a paper sack, then left when she refused to close early for a picnic. A widower from the next county had praised her bookkeeping, then asked how soon she would sell the store after they married. A traveling preacher's nephew had written her one poem and spent the next week bragging that he could tame her. Ruth let them all go. After that, the town treated her loneliness like a verdict she had earned. She heard the whispers through the thin front windows. She heard them in church. She heard them when women lowered their voices too late, when men laughed into their gloves, when children repeated things they had no business knowing. Ruth Mercer will have that store for a husband. She never answered. Answering gave people a seat at the table of your heart, and Ruth had learned to keep that table bare. Then, on a January afternoon sharp enough to split skin, the bell above her shop door rang once. Not its usual bright jingle. A slow, heavy ring, as if the wind itself had pushed a man inside. Ruth, he was tall enough to make the frame look badly built, broad across the shoulders, wrapped in an old buffalo coat whitened with snow. His beard was dark and streaked with frost. A scar ran from the corner of one eye into his cheek, pale against weathered skin. His boots carried half the mountain with them. For a moment, all Ruth heard was the stove ticking. And the wind dragging its nails along the outside wall. He did it like respect was a habit. "Ma'am," he said. His voice was low, worn by weather. Ruth set the lamp chimney down. "Afternoon." He crossed the store slowly, taking in the shelves, the nail barrels, the hanging harness straps, the stacked winter blankets. Most men looked at goods by price. This one looked at them by use. He chose coffee, salt, lamp oil, a spool of heavy thread, and a tin of salve. When he placed the items on the counter, Ruth noticed blood dried black along the cuff of his left sleeve. "You need a doctor?" she asked. He glanced down as if remembering he had a body. "Needle caught me on a trap chain. It'll close." Trap chains don't usually carry needles. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. This one had opinions. Ruth rang up the purchase he paid in coin. Exact coin. No bargaining. No joke about a woman counting too carefully. Then his eyes moved to the store around her again. "You keep all this by yourself?" I do. Freight stock accounts, stove, roof customers, all of it. The stranger gave one slow nod. That's not little work. Ruth's hand paused over the coins. People in Hallow Creek had called her many things. Stubborn, cold, unnatural, proud. They had never called the life she carried heavy. It is work, she said. Most things worth keeping are. The wind pressed against the glass. Snow slid from his coat and melted on her floorboards. What name goes with that account? She asked. What name said it without trying to make it mean more. The rope burned near her thumb, the old blue bruise where a crate had slipped. He looked away before pity could form that mattered. At the door, he stopped and turned back. Your sign's loose on the east side, he said. You got a ladder? I have one. He waited, as if giving her a chance to refuse. When she said nothing, he took the hammer from the nail shelf, stepped outside, and climbed into the storm. Ruth stood behind the counter while the whole shop listened to the pounding above the porch. You didn't have to do that. No, he said. I didn't. Then he lifted his bundle and left. The bell rang softly behind him. By supper, half the town knew a mountain man had fixed Ruth Mercer's sign without being asked. By morning, the other half had decided what it meant. Nothing good. Caleb returned 2 days later. He bought beans, cartridges, and a strip of rawhide. He also bought a peppermint stick from the jar on the counter, then set it beside the small boy waiting behind him with 3 pennies and a worried face. Looks like that one's already paid for, Caleb said. The boy stared. Ruth did too. Caleb did not wink. He did not ask for praise. He simply took his parcel and stood aside. The boy grabbed the peppermint and ran like joy had legs. After that, Caleb came in whenever the weather drove him down from the timberline. Sometimes he bought supplies. Sometimes he asked whether any freight had come over the pass. Once he brought in a broken coffee grinder from a miner's cabin and asked if Ruth knew anyone who could mend the handle. Ruth took it from him, studied the crack, and said, I can. He did not laugh. That was the beginning of something so quiet the town almost missed it. Almost. They saw him standing near her counter after sundown, listening while she explained which families were short on flour and which men would pay after spring calving. They saw him carry a stove box to the back room and leave before anyone could say he was lingering. They saw Ruth speak more words to Caleb Rusk in 1 week than she gave most neighbors in a month. Hallow Creek did not like what it could not name. At church, Mrs. Bellamy leaned close enough for Ruth to smell clove on her breath. Mountain men aren't made for porches, dear. Ruth pulled on her gloves. Neither are storms. Yet here we are. Mrs. Bellamy's smile tightened. I'm only saying a woman in your position should not mistake attention for intention. Ruth looked at her then. My position? The woman flushed, but not enough to apologize. You know what I mean. That evening, when the last customer left and blue dusk settled over the snow, Caleb stood by the flour barrels while Ruth counted the till. They bother you about me? He asked. Ruth did not look up. The town bothers itself about everything. That isn't what I asked. Her fingers stopped on the coins. The words landed harder than Ruth expected. She turned to the shelf behind her and straightened a row of tins that did not need straightening. Then they can enjoy being right. Caleb stepped no closer. He did not soften the truth with promises he had not earned. I've left places, he said. Never denied it. Some places are built to push a man out. Some men are built to be pushed. Ruth faced him. And this place. His eyes moved over the store. The stove, the sacks, the worn counter. Her father's old measuring stick nailed under the window.
I haven't decided what this place is yet. Ruth wanted that answer to offend her. It did not, because it was honest. Honesty was warmer than flattery, even when it burned. The trouble began the next morning.
The South freight wagon was due at first light with Ruth's winter order: flour, salt pork, lamp oil, coffee, medicine bottles, 2 bolts of navy wool, boot leather, and the new lockbox from St. Joseph. It also carried the banknote she needed signed before Monday. Without that shipment, her shelves would not merely look thin. Her credit would crack by noon. No wagon had appeared. By 2, the snow thickened. By dusk, the road from Widow's Cut vanished under white drift. Ruth stood on the porch with her shawl drawn tight, watching the empty road until cold settled into her bones. Freight was his religion because freight was money at the livery. Men shook their heads. Passes closed, the marshal said. No sense sending riders blind. He's out there with my goods, Ruth said. Maybe he turned back. Then he'd be in Mason's Hollow by now. The marshal looked toward the mountains and then away from them. Can't risk men for merchandise. Merchandise. Ruth felt the word like a slap behind her. Hard season to run short, Cyrus said gently, which was the way cruel men sharpened a knife in public. If you need to discuss an arrangement, my office is warm. Ruth looked at him. I'd rather freeze standing. A few men chuckled. Cyrus did not. When Ruth returned to her store, the whole place seemed smaller. The shelves she had kept full through discipline and debt now looked like ribs beneath skin. Every missing crate had a shape in her mind. Every unpaid account in her ledger felt heavier. Caleb came in after dark. One look at her face, and he set his bundle down. Freight didn't come. No. What road? South Road through Widow's Cut. Who marked it last? Ruth frowned. Ruth set the last trail poles. If he left Mason's Hollow on time, 2 hours. If he didn't, less. Caleb looked toward the window. Snow blew sideways through the lamplight. Ruth understood before he spoke. No, he looked back. You don't even know where he is, she said. I know where men get lost when trail poles lie. Then tell the marshal. He won't move tonight. Then no one moves tonight. Caleb picked up his hat. Ruth came around the counter. Caleb. He stopped at the sound of his name. The store had gone very quiet. You owe me nothing, she said. No. You don't have to prove anything to this town. His face hardened, not with anger, but with decision. I'm not writing for the town. Ruth had no answer for that. He stepped into the storm. By morning, Hallow Creek had swallowed the news and turned it into gossip. Caleb Rusk rode out after Ruth Mercer's wagon. By afternoon, the gossip had soured. Mountain men probably kept riding. By the next day, men at the stove in the blacksmith shop were saying he had taken what supplies he needed and gone back to whatever cave had birthed him. Ruth heard it all. She opened her store anyway. She sold the last of the coffee by the half scoop. She cut the final strip of boot leather for a ranch hand whose son had no soles left. She watered the molasses. She told 3 women the flour would come soon, though her own bin showed wood at the bottom. At night, she sat at the counter with the bank paper in front of her and her father's measuring stick under her palm. She did not cry. Crying was for private rooms, and Ruth had turned her whole life into a public counter. On the 3rd evening, Cyrus Pell came in without removing his hat. The disrespect was small enough to deny and large enough to mean. Ruth, he said, the bank won't wait on sentiment. No. I can assume the note, keep you on as manager. No shame in sense. She looked around the store. Her father had built plank by plank, through fever, drought, debt, and war prices. She saw herself at 16 learning weights, at 20 burying him, at 24 refusing the first offer to buy, at 32 standing in a room full of other people's needs, with no one willing to admit she had met them. No shame in sense, she repeated. Cyrus smiled. Ruth slid his account book from beneath the counter and opened it to a marked page. You still owe me $11.40 from the October sugar order. His smile died. When you pay that, Ruth said, we can discuss your wisdom. Cyrus left red-faced, but victory did not fill shelves. After midnight, the storm worsened. The store shook around Ruth as if the mountains had put both hands on it. The stove had burned low. The lamp flame bent and recovered. Ruth sat awake because sleep felt like surrender. Then she heard it. At first, she thought it was the sign. A dull clank in the wind, then another, not wood. Iron, she stood. The sound came again, closer this time. Harness chain, wagon wheel, a horse blowing hard. Ruth crossed the store slowly. Her hand found the door latch before she could open it. The bell rang, one heavy note. The door pushed inward. Snow came first, then Caleb Rusk. He stood in the doorway with blood on one temple, ice in his beard, and one arm wrapped in a strip of torn canvas. Two exhausted horses stood steaming in the street. The freight tarp snapped under ropes glazed with ice. Ruth's breath left her. Caleb leaned one hand against the doorframe. Found your coffee, he said. For one stunned second, Ruth laughed. It broke out of her like something escaping. Then she ran past him into the snow. The wagon was real. The crates were real. Her name was stenciled on the side of the largest box in black paint. R. Mercer Dry Goods. Nels Harrow lifted his head weakly. Trail marker was turned, he rasped. Took us into the old logging wash, wheel dropped through ice. Ruth looked back at Caleb. He reached into his coat and pulled out a splintered red trail pole. the top half hacked clean through where the marker notch should have faced the road. Wind didn't do that, Caleb said. By then doors were opening all along the street. Lanterns appeared in windows. Men came out pulling coats over nightshirts. Women gathered on porches. The marshal pushed through the snow, staring at the wagon as if it had risen from a grave. Cyrus Pell stood outside his store without a hat, his face pale in the lamplight. Caleb saw him. So did Ruth. But Caleb did not accuse. He did not need to. The broken trail pole in his hand spoke clearly enough for every guilty heart on that street. The marshal took the pole. "Where did you find this?" "Half-mile above Widow's Cut," Caleb said. "Wrong side of the fork." Arrow followed it until the road vanished. Nels coughed. "I thought I was on the county line." Ruth looked at the man on the wagon, then at Caleb's torn coat, his wounded arm, the blue-white exhaustion around his mouth. "You pulled him out?" His lead horse did most of the arguing. He had ridden 40 miles of winter road and come back with Ruth's freight. GHT. They had said Ruth's store was only a room full of goods. Yet every family on that street could see their own winter in those crates. Flour for children, lamp oil for nights, salve for split hands, coffee for men who pretended they did not need warmth. They had said Ruth Mercer was made of iron like it was a flaw. Now the town understood that iron had been holding up half of them for years. Now without anyone asking who should help. Cyrus Pell disappeared before the last crate hit the porch. Inside the store, the shelves filled again. Not magically, not neatly. With snow, mud, aching backs, and hands passing weight from one person to another. Near dawn, the final box sat behind the counter. Ruth signed the bank paper with fingers that shook only once. When the others had gone, Caleb remained by the stove, stripped of his buffalo coat, his injured arm bound properly now. He looked too large for the room and too tired to stand, yet he stayed on his feet. Ruth placed a cup of coffee on the counter. "You should sit." "Afraid I won't get back up." The storm had ended. Morning pressed pale light against the windows. Hallow Creek looked washed clean, though Ruth knew towns did not become pure just because snow covered their tracks. Caleb held the coffee between both hands. "Marshall will ask questions. He should. You know what that means." Ruth nodded. "It means people will talk about something true for once." Caleb's tired smile appeared and vanished. Ruth leaned against the counter. She wanted to thank him, but the words felt too small. Thank you was what you said when someone held a door, not when a man entered a blizzard and came back carrying the future you thought you had lost. So she said something else. "Why did you come back?" Caleb looked at the repaired green sign above the front window, visible from inside in reverse. "I've slept in places no one expected me to stay," he said. "Camps, caves, line shacks, empty barns. You learn the difference between shelter and a place that has a heart." Ruth was very still. He looked at her then. "This store has one because you do." For once, Ruth had no iron answer ready. The woman Hallow Creek had called cold stood behind her counter with morning light on her face and felt every year of being unseen loosen its grip. Caleb set the cup down. I can leave after the marshal takes my statement, he said. If my staying makes your life harder. At this time it hurt. At the green sign he had fixed before he had any reason to care. Then she looked at him. There is a room over the storeroom, she said. Roof leaks on the north side. Stovepipe smokes if the wind turns. Floor creaks loud enough to wake the dead. Caleb's expression changed slowly, as if he did not trust hope when it came dressed as practical information. Sounds terrible. It is. Soon there would be questions, apologies poorly made, favors offered too late, and stories reshaped by people who wanted credit for understanding what they had mocked. But inside the store, Ruth did not wait for Hallow Creek to grant permission. She had spent years being measured by people who had never carried her load. Now the only man she wanted near that load sat by her stove with frost still melting from his sleeves. Caleb stood. Ruth Mercer, he said. Are you offering me a leaking room or a reason? Her smile came slowly, small, real, and entirely her own. Both, if you know how to repair a roof. For the first time since he had walked through her door, Caleb Rusk smiled fully. I know roofs. Good. The green sign held fast against the morning. By noon, everyone in Hallow Creek would know Caleb Rusk had stayed. By spring, they would know he had married Ruth Mercer under that same green sign, with flour dust on his boots and her father's measuring stick laid across the counter like a blessing. But the truth had already happened before any vow was spoken. It happened when a woman the town called unlovable stopped believing the town was allowed to name her. It happened when a man who knew every road out of Hallow Creek chose the one that led back to her ear. And from that winter on, whenever the wind struck the mountains and the store bell rang, Ruth no longer heard judgment in its sound. She heard a door opening, and this time, no one was leaving.